Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody and good morning. We are back with a new installment of our Exago Support Lab series. Today we're going to be discussing chart data layout types, which is something we've received quite a bit of confusion on, and we'd like to kind of clear it up for you guys and help it become more clear. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to get started. We will aim to be up and running at 11:03. Okay. So my clock over here reads 11:03 Eastern Time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. If everyone before we begin could just type a Y or a yes, as usual, in the question pane box so that I know I'm coming through loud and clear, that would be great. Awesome. Already getting responses. Thank you guys so much. All right, all set. Okay. So my name is Emma. I am here today to teach you all about chart data layout types. My colleague Nicole Hittner is here with me to help keep the questions answered, so please feel free to ask them as we go. You don't need to wait till I pause, etc. Nicole will be monitoring those questions and answering them as we proceed through. All right. So we've had a bit of confusion over chart data layout types. Generally, around when to use which one, why would we use one over the other, what benefits do they bring to us. So today what we're hoping to do is give you the ability after this lab to assess your data and your intended display in terms of your chart, and then quickly be able to select an appropriate chart data layout type without the confusion regarding how your data is set up best lends itself to a layout type. So I'm going to begin with a very quick overview of charting in general, just because this logic is what we'll be applying to our understanding of the data layout types. All right, so charts illustrate our data to us so that we can spot patterns and trends in our data values. But it's important to remember that each chart is made up of a collection of points on a grid. So we're going to be referring to X values and Y values today, assigning assigning cells to the X value and cells to the Y value so that you know exactly where all of the data is pulling from in your report. With this simplistic explanation in mind, there are several ways to represent this collection of points on a chart, right? So if we look at the designers of two of the reports alone that I'm going to show you today, you'll see that you can make the exact same chart with just a different data setup. So you can really, if you learn them inside and out, you'll be able to set up your data according to the easiest way, in your opinion, to create your chart. So you can really personalize it to yourself. Now, the application must be able to transform your points into a chart regardless of the design. So for this reason, this is why we have 3 data layout types. Understanding the way that you have designed your report will help you to select the right layout type. So that's what we aim to show you today. We're going to go through each layout pretty in detail to explain its intended use, and then we're going to show you how we've implemented that logic in each of our examples here today. Okay, so I'm going to navigate over to the application so that we can get started. And we're going to go right into our report tree, and I'm going to begin by running this chart so that we can, this report, so we can see exactly what we're looking at. So data layout 1 has been aptly renamed cell-based chart. Sorry about that, guys. Cell-based charts is for building a specific type of single series chart using a collection of static points on your report. So cell-based charts cannot be dynamic, and this is the biggest difference between data layout 1 and then 2 and 3. In that, in data layout 1, each label and each value must be pulled directly from a defined cell. So we'll go into our designer here, and you can see that none of these cells are dynamic. So how do I know? In Exago, a dynamic data point is one that comes from a field, whereas static points are defined explicitly on the report. Fields are denoted by a little triangle in the upper left-hand corner of the cell. So if you see that triangle, you know that you have a dynamic cell and that there's a field in there. So moving along, if we continue to look at the designer here, I have actually color-coded the data that feeds each part of the chart for us so that we can see very clearly exactly where all of the information is coming from. So here we have item 1, item 2, and item 3 in our report. In our chart, and you can see that what we're actually mapping is the minimum delivery time, the average delivery time, and the maximum delivery time from the days that you order to the day that it ships from our fictitious Northwind company. So if I go back into our designer, you can see that this label right here, our point value label, minimum delivery time and average delivery time, as well as maximum, are being pulled directly from these statically defined cells. So I typed in minimum delivery time days here, and then in my chart wizard, as my point label, pulled that text from that cell directly. The corresponding formula here, I'll walk through really quickly so that we can understand exactly what it's doing. We'll begin with the inner function datediff. Datediff takes 3 arguments, the first of which tells us the unit in which to give us our answer. So in this case, we have D wrapped in quotes, tells us we want our answer in days. The second field is the first date, and the third field is the final date. So this function is going to take the 2 dates that I've inputted and find the difference in the number of days. Then around all of that, I've wrapped it in an agmin function so that it pulls the minimum value. And you can see here that the minimum value ends up being 1. We've then mapped each of these to be the Y value, the corresponding Y value for our chart. So you can see here that this 1 is reflected in the value displayed here, 1. We then have 8.58 as our average time, and 37 as our maximum. And you can see exactly how each of those is pulled from these statically defined cells. Okay, so I'm going to stop for one moment and just make sure that that makes sense to everyone and that the questions look okay. All right, we're doing good. Data layout 1 is usually one that's pretty simple to use. There's about 1 use case, and that's pretty much it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back into the chart wizard really quickly just to reiterate exactly what we're seeing here. If we wanted, say we had 9 bars on our bar chart, here we only have 3, we would have 9 differently defined point values and corresponding point labels because there is no dynamic aspect to this chart. So anything you want to see on the chart has to be defined both in your report and then in your chart wizard here. All right, so I'm going to jump right back over to the output and just recap everything we've just talked about so that we really pull the important things from this section. Looking at the output alone, it's difficult to distinguish which layout we could be using. This chart could be accomplished with other layouts. However, if you combine the output with the report design and the chart wizard that we just talked through, it's clear why we would use a cell-based layout in this case. We are also displaying the same data that our chart is displaying graphically, just above it to help you draw these parallels from cells to charting. If we wish to only display the chart, of course, we can suppress this row. And what that'll do is just display the chart. So I can actually show you how that would appear. If I suppress this row and run my report again, I will just have the chart. And the caveat here is that I don't have those numbers up here to tell me exactly what they are. If I hover over my bars, it will display minimum delivery time and then the value next to it. So I still do have those numeric values available to me. Okay, so that's about it for data layout 1. We'll come back at the end when we kind of recap all of them and when to use what, but we're going to move along to data layout 2 right now. Okay, so if I open this right up for us. So this is a little bit more complicated. Data layouts 2 and 3 can both be used for creating multi-series charts, but there are some important differences in the report designs that they work best with. Okay. So one of the main differences here that I would like to draw your attention to first is that data layout 2 is designed to show 2 or more unrelated y values for a single x value. Okay, so let's take a look at this option first. Here we have our x value is employees.fullname. We know it's a dynamic field because it has this triangle in the top corner. So if I run my report, it's not statically defined. I can return Stephen Buchanan, I can return Andrew Fuller, I can return Janet Leverling, etc. So from this one field in cell in my designer, I return multiple different data values. So that's what we mean by dynamic, just to give you a little bit of a broader understanding of that. Okay, so here we're analyzing statistics related to employees at our company. So our x value is here and all of our y values relate to this x value. The difference is that these y values are not related. So years employed has nothing to do with the sales that each employee has made, which also has nothing to do with the revenue that's generated by each employee. So just as we have amended data layout 1 to be more accurately called cell-based charting, we have amended the second to be called column-based charting. In using this label, we want to make sure that we have a single dynamic x value, in this case our employee name, as I have said, and multiple y values. In this case, our y values are represented by years of employment here, sales, and revenue generated. So we're going to take a look at our data to verify that this is the correct layout for our charting needs. So let's go back into the designer. So first we are going to verify that we're working with dynamic data points. We see this triangle. We've already covered that in the output we see more than one result, so it must be dynamic. Second, we are also sure that we're interested in calculations only for this one group. We do have 3 unique calculations, but that is exactly the intended use of column-based layout, so we know that we're on the right track here. So one final point on using data layout 2 to chart different calculations is that it helps if our calculations are in the same numeric range. So here, years employed is going to range from 7 to 9, so easily the smallest range out of these 3. This is going to range, sales made is going to range from about 40 to 140, and revenue is going to be in the thousands range. So what we did here is take this formula for revenue. I'll go ahead into the editor. And we just divided it by 1,000. And then I've amended in my legend, my chart legend, that it says revenue generated in thousands. So we know it's per thousand. So then everything is in a similar numeric range, and you can see that our chart we don't have invisible first smallest lines. They're all pretty representative of their numbers. Okay. So I have again color-coded our data values here so that you see exactly what data from our report is feeding into the chart. I find that this is the most important visual aid when you're trying to understand the difference between data layout 2 and data layout 3. So this is the takeaway point. I would focus in on this part. Data layout 2 is called a column-based layout because we're pulling our information, our data, from columns. Everything for our first series can be found in this first column. Everything for our second series all the way through can be found in this second column. And everything for our third series can be found in this third column. All of the data is organized by column. Okay. So this layout makes it very simple to see exactly how the chart wizard is adding the multiple unrelated y values to our given x. And we're gonna take a look really quickly again within the chart wizard and just see how our data setup here is different from our data setup in our data layout 1. Okay, so here we know that we want our x-axis labels to be employee names. So that is fairly straightforward. We're going to select employee full name for that. And then our series values are simply going to be each of those 3 calculations that we wish to do with relation to our x value. So we have they're named appropriately. The name is just going to be what you'd like to display in the legend. So years employed, orders made, and revenue generated. This is the important part. These are the formulas. So these formulas are structured in our report, all in the same row in this footer on employee's full name, so that when we run it, it displays in a column as such. In that, when we go here, we're going to select first this formula for the date diff, and this is going to be, just as we just went through the date diff formula, this is the same thing. Here we're getting it in years as opposed to days because it's a bit longer of a time period. We're doing it from their employee hire date, and then we're using this now function, which just goes to right now in time. We're distinctly counting the ordered dates, which will give us a count on the orders. And then we're just summing the revenue and dividing it by 1,000, as I said. So the actual values are not very complicated here. It's just important to know where they're coming from and how it places them correctly on our chart. So again, I will run this and quickly talk through the output again, just so that we again recap everything and have it fresh in our minds. So looking at the output, it is pretty obvious which chart data layout type we had to use for this, as we have unrelated calculations. So a very easy way to identify that you're going to need to use data layout 2 is if you know that you are trying to map unrelated y's to one x. Hands down, you're only going to use data layout 2. This is the easiest way to create that kind of chart. Again, please note that the color coding is exactly where the data is coming from for each of the series, so it's important to know exactly how those correlate. Okay, so I don't want to beat a dead horse and go over this too much, so if there is questions, please feel free to continue to type in. I'm going to check them quickly. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead over to data layout 3, and I'm going to walk you through this really quickly. So data layout 3 is also used for multi-series charts, just as data layout 2 is, but it compares 2 or more related y values for a given x value. So in this case, we're going to show the revenue generated for each employee for 3 consecutive years. So how do I know this is the right layout for me? Well, a great indicator that this is the layout that you're going to need to create your chart is the presence of nested groups. So there is text here. We have it white so that it shows up in the output, but I'm going to just change it to black here so you can see what we're doing. Okay. So our first group here is on employee full name, and I'll pull this over so that you can see the full group header label. The first one is on employee's full name. The second one is on the year of the order date, so that's going to pull the year out of the order date field and separate them based on that. Okay, So here what we're looking to show is a calculation per year per employee. So that double grouping is a very quick indicator of, a very good indicator that you're going to need data layout 3. All right. We also don't need to worry about the data points being in a similar numeric range in this instance, since we're reporting on the same field for varying years, and thus values should be relatively similar, at least in terms of their range. So let's talk a little bit about how this would look in the chart wizard, as we've done with the other two. So here, if I navigate into the chart wizard, you can see this one is perhaps the most minimalistic setup. If you lay your data out for data layout 3, it becomes a very simple setup when you actually go to create your chart. So here for our data values, we have the sum of the revenue. For our labels, we're labeling with just employees.full name. And then for our series labels, we want it to be the year. So the first series is going to be the first year that we're considering, the second is going to be the second year, and the third will be the third year, all with respect to the same employee, and then we'll repeat for the next employee. So let's run this so that we can get a look at what it actually looks like in the output. Okay, so here our beginning is a little bit more stretched out. We have a column-based layout here. So data layout 3 also received a new name. We now call it the column-based chart layout. And this is in direct contrast to data layout 2. So if you remember here, we had color-coded so that it was very clear that all of the information for the first series came from this column. What we have done now is all of the information for the first series comes from this row, and then this row, and then this row, and so on and so forth. So the first row of every group. If we then navigate to the end, you'll see that our report is nicely formatted and is pulling, again, color-coded from those sections. So this is what we call a row-based chart data layout type for this reason. Okay. So now we've gone through each of our chart data layout types. We're going to take a look at some possible overlap here because, of course, there's not only, as with everything in Exago, there is not only one way to do everything. There is a couple ways to create the same chart, and I do want to show you, just for the purposes of illustrating how simply the way your data is laid out in the report designer can influence how you're going to want to select your data layout when going to create a chart. So consider if we tried to report on this data right here, we're trying to make the same chart using data layout 2. It seems intuitively that we would be able to do so if we can chart unrelated data pertaining to an X. Why would we not be able to chart related data pertaining to an X? So of course we can. The difference is simply how the data must be set up. So this is where the new names really lend themselves to helping you decide. A column-based chart must be organized such that your chart wizard can pull information relevant to one series from a column, whereas a row-based chart, as we see here, must be organized so that your chart wizard is able to pull from relevant rows for each series. So what I have done here to illustrate this is created the exact same chart that we see here using column-based charting to clearly illustrate the difference. So I'm going to run this here, and you will see that it is the exact same chart, excuse me. We're showing 2014, 2015, 2016 revenue generated for each employee. So we are showing revenue per year per employee again, but rather than using nested grouping as we did in the layout for 3, we have, I'll show you in the designer, laid it out column-based as we were discussing. So I've statically defined revenue 2014, revenue 2015, and 2016, and then these are simply formulas again to pull. So for the year 2014, I want to pull the revenue. If the year is not 2014, I'm returning 0, and then I'm summing all of that. The formulas are not so much the important part of this lab, which is why I'm kind of breezing through them. The important part is to understand why our data layout is relevant to which chart data layout type we select. So if I go back to the output of this, we're just going to go through the differences between these two. So you can see here, as with data layout 2's unrelated Y values, we have the same setup, but these are related. So you see revenue for the first year. This all corresponds to the first series. So this first series is pulling only from this column. Similarly, this series, this little orange color in the middle, pulling from the middle column. And then finally, of course, the revenue for 2016 is the final series, and it's coming from this final column. This one we have the same chart. Revenue for this one is representing 2014 for this employee. The difference is that we are now pulling from a row. So we're pulling from this row rather than pulling from this cell in this column. So those are the big differences. You can see that there's advantages and disadvantages. When we were using data layout 2, we had no grouping and we displayed our series values in columns, whereas with data layout 3, we had nested groups and we displayed our series values in rows. This is an example of how more than one data layout type can be used to create the same report, but maybe one favors the structure of your report. So if you already have it set up and you know how you've set up your data, it's much easier to select a chart type based on that when you know which one uses which. All right. So what I've done is created a very quick PowerPoint that really just asks which chart data layout type should I use. So it gives you guidelines to be able to select a chart data layout type based on your setup. So you're going to use cell-based charting if your labels and values are being pulled from statically populated cells, which means that you have no dynamic fields included in your report. Now this doesn't mean that in your whole report you don't, it's the fields you're looking to chart on. And if you're creating a single series chart. Oops. So if you're creating a single series chart, there's no reason, it's very likely that you're going to be using data layout 1. Data layout 2, or column-based charting, we're going to use them if your X values are dynamically populating the cell that they're being pulled from. So we saw that employee full name. That field was dynamically populating that cell, so we knew that we had to use data layout 2 or 3. And again, do you see the triangle in the corner of the cell? This is the easiest way to know. Do you want to show 2 or more unrelated Y values for a single X value? Are you trying to show years employed versus money generated versus number of sales? You're not going to be able to do that with data layout 3 because they have to be related. So here, there's another indicator that we need to use data layout 2. A multi-series chart is likely going to point you towards column or row-based charting. And finally, if you understood this lab completely and you think you're ready to just go based on row and column based, you can just look at it and know it's column based, and then you're going to know this is the layout you need. If this is a little bit abstract for you, all of these should be able to show you exactly which one would best suit your needs. And finally, row-based charting is the way to go. If, again, your X values are dynamically populating the cells, so do you see that triangle? Are you creating a multi-series chart? Are your series related? So are we representing information per a field, per another field? In our example, we did revenue per year per employee. Do you have one or more nested groups on your report? If you have nested groups, it's likely that you're going to be looking to use data layout 3. It's what it's designed for. And finally, is your data arrangement row-based? Again, if you're comfortable enough looking at your data and identifying it as row-based or column-based, that is simply the most straightforward way to identify which data layout you're going to need. Okay. All right, so it looks like that is the whole cover of all the data layout types. I'm going to mute myself for just a moment and go through these questions to see if there's anything that we want to answer on air. So sit tight and keep typing if you have more questions that you'd like answered right now, but I'll be right back. Okay, so it looks like Nicole did a phenomenal job of answering all the questions as I went. So I think we are about set. There was a question if recordings are sent out after the lab, after all of the labs and trainings, you do receive a recording of what you just attended, so you can pass it on or rewatch it yourself, however you'd like to use that information is completely up to you. So it looks like we're all set. I hope you all enjoyed today's lab and found it informative. I hoped to put it together in the most clear way because these are something that can be a little bit kludgy to figure out on your own. But hopefully today helped you. We hope you have a wonderful week and look forward to seeing you at the next lab. Thanks, everybody.